Hey Dream Builders, I hope you're having a good start to your day of prayer and fasting. This is probably the last video I'll ever shoot in Lounge 1, as this is the week where we're handing it over to the new tenant and we're just about to start our team meeting. So they're just hanging out over here. But before we get into the team meeting, I just wanted to jump online and just share with you some thoughts that I shared this morning at the brilliant prayer time we had. Great turnout from our Dream Builders. I know a lot of you couldn't make it, and so I thought for those who couldn't be there, it'd be good just to share the essence of what I communicated this morning to our Dream Builders to really set us up for an effective day of prayer and fasting. I don't know about you, sometimes my ability to see what God is doing is limited by facts, F-A-C-T-S, facts. And sometimes it's limited by finance. When we are thinking about the acquisition of a new building and a new space for Paul Campus or for Sunny Hill Church, we can be limited by thinking, well, do we have the financial means? And sometimes, by the way, I don't know if you can hear those pounding noises. There is some piling happening outside. They're driving some big kind of steel things into the ground, but it sounds like I'm in Jurassic Park. I feel like there's a Tyrannosaurus Rex coming about to eat me. But yeah, sometimes I live under the ceiling of the limitation of facts and the limitation of finance. And I really feel like the Holy Spirit has just been challenging me recently to really grow in faith, to really engage my faith muscle in the things that God is calling Sunny Hill to. On that note, turn to Hebrews 11, verse 1, just quickly, because in the book of Hebrews, we see a brilliant definition of faith. This is what the writer says in verse 1. It says, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. So we know faith is the component that activates supernatural vision. It's the component that helps us to see what is not yet material. And I think, I've been really challenged by that, because when we think about the building aspect of Sunny Hill, it's like, can I get the clarity of vision to see what God is showing us, rather than just seeing with the limitation of my eyes to go, oh, well, this is the finance I see. This is the challenge I see. We know the council doesn't really give permission for change of use to buildings, and sometimes we live under the ceiling of facts. But really, I just think God is challenging us to really engage our faith muscle and begin to see what God is saying and what God is doing. On that note, if you turn to Matthew 21, we see the potential of faith as well. Like, what is faith's potential? In Matthew 21, check this out in verse 18. Matthew 21, it says this: early in the morning, as he was on his way back to the city, speaking of Jesus, he was hungry. Seeing a fig tree by the road, he went up to it, but found nothing on it except leaves. Then he said to it, may you never bear fruit again. Immediately the tree withered. When the disciples saw this, they were amazed. They were like, how did the fig tree wither so quickly? They asked. Verse 21, Jesus replied, I tell you the truth, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to the fig tree, but you can also say to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and it will be done. Verse 22, here's the soundbite: if you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer. So Jesus pronounces a reality on this fig tree, that it would not produce fruit again, and it immediately withers before his and the disciples' eyes, and the disciples are blown away by this. And Jesus basically uses it at a teaching point to teaching to the principle of faith. That simply, Jesus says, well, I believed it would happen, and so it happened. And I really like this picture, this illustration that Jesus gives of a mountain, that you can speak to mountains and tell it to be thrown into the sea, and it will be thrown into the sea. Because I think mountains are a great kind of metaphor for some of the insurmountable challenges that we perceive in our life. You know, if we were to look at what a mountain is, it's an immovable obstruct. It's an ever-present thing. It's not easily shifted. It's more certain than a house. It's more certain than a tree even. It is a big, immovable object on paper. Those are the facts, okay? But in faith, Jesus says you can tell a mountain to be thrown into the sea. You can shift mountains. You can move mountains. But what's important is that you believe. And so really today, as we're going through our day of prayer and fasting, really want to encourage you to dare to believe, to begin to see, to actually speak to the mountain of the challenges of acquiring building, acquiring physical territory, acquiring land, whatever it looks like, and actually begin to see it and then speak to the mountain. And so sometimes that may look like maybe we are speaking prophetically to the council to give us permission for whatever. Maybe it's prophetically and in faith speaking to the bank or estate agents, whatever it may be. But I think sometimes the building feels like an immovable mountain. And I really want to pray today that as we are fasting, that actually we will, I don't know, dare to believe. And if we believe, Jesus says you will receive. In Matthew 17, 14 to 21, so just a couple of chapters earlier, let's just look at this. An interesting situation with a demonic boy. So Matthew 17, verse 14 to 21, listen to this. It says, when they came to the crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. He says, Lord, have mercy on my son, he said. He has seizures and is suffering greatly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him. So this dad is at his wit's end. His son is self-harming, presenting some kind of demonic manifestation. And he brings him to the disciples, but the disciples couldn't address the issue. Jesus' response in verse 17, he says, "O unbelieving and perverse generation," Jesus replied, "how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy here to me." Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed from that moment. Then the disciples came to Jesus in private and asked, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" Jesus answers quite simply, quite harshly. He says, "Because you have so little faith." Like you could not see an answer to this prayer because you didn't have the faith to believe it. And he goes on, he says, "I'll tell you the truth. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed," here we see the picture again, "you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." Jesus says even the activation of small faith can have massive results. And again, he uses this picture of moving a mountain. And again, as we are committing our day to prayer and fasting today, what we're really asking in the Spirit is just that we would see a mountain moved, like possibilities come for Sunny Hill Church for building, even though it seems impossible, even though the facts say that maybe it can't happen, even though the finances may not be where we need them to be, but actually to engage that faith muscle and begin to speak it, begin to believe it, and then in due course receive it. If you look at that same passage that we're looking at in Matthew 17, but look at Mark's account of that same passage in Mark chapter 9, verse 21 to 29, what we see is a little caveat. Jesus says, speaking of the demonic boy, he says, this sort, speaking of the demon, only come out by prayer and fasting. So what we're seeing is that prayer and fasting is crucial to seeing something shift. There are some things that won't be shifted unless prayer and fasting is engaged. And so today, I want to encourage you and I want to motivate you and mobilize you. That's the intent of this video, that you would feel like actually God has given you the potential to move mountains through the course of faith. And faith is increased and amplified through prayer and fasting. And finally, what I shared this morning is in 1 Corinthians 13, where we've been looking a couple of weeks ago at the gifts of the Spirit. In 1 Corinthians 13, Paul says this. He says, now I'm going to show you the most excellent way. He says, if I speak in tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. And he says, if I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. So again, we see this mountain-moving faith component again. And Paul says, listen, if you can move mountains with your faith, but you fail to love, then, you come up with nothing. So for me, the challenge is this, is yes, we are praying for a building. Yes, we're petitioning heaven, Lord, would you give us a building? But let us not uncouple ourselves from the mandate to love. The motivation for the building has to be driven by a vision for people, by a vision for souls. It can't be just for a nice building. It can't be for big bricks and mortar and big spaces and fancy this, fancy that. I think ultimately what God's laid on my heart is that we would get a family home, a home for the family. That's what we want to see. And ultimately, if we are not loving people, then why would God give us a home in which to bring in the family? And on that note, I think you can hear that the Tyrannosaurus Rex is getting ever so closer. I feel like if there was a table with a glass of water on it, it'd be like a dramatic... But I just really want to encourage you that as you go through this day of prayer and fasting, there'll be moments, of course, we've done this before, where you are hungry and you're thinking, does this really do anything? Well, as we read in the chapter in Mark's Gospel today, that actually some things are only shifted by prayer and fasting. So be assured that when you go without, when you say no to food or whatever it is that God has put on your heart to fast today, that actually what we are saying is like clearing the decks for God to speak to us clearly. And then tonight at 7 p.m. when we gather at Corfmullen, for those who can make it, I really want to encourage you to feed back what you feel God's been saying to you today. We want to see the spirit of prophecy released across the body. So I really want you to kind of throughout the day be saying, Lord, is there anything you want me to bring to Sunny Hill tonight? Is there anything that you want me to offer to leadership? Pictures, scriptures, encouragement, prophetic insight. And you know, it's then our responsibility as leadership to weigh those words. But ultimately, this is your church, this is my church. And so together we want to discern what is God saying and what is God doing. That's what today is about. So I hope as you go through the day, missing snacks, missing coffee breaks, missing lunches, missing dinners, that you will really know a deep edification and a stirring of that faith that has the potential to move mountains. Have a great Tuesday. See you tonight at 7 p.m.